A Canadian musical genius, Leonard Cohen, was laid to rest on November 10th, 2016. He was lowered in an unadorned pine box beside his parents, just as he requested. A great but humble man, even in his death. His friends included people like Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell, and Bob Dylan said of him, "Leonard heard the songs of the spheres, and he sang them to us." Leonard heard the songs of the heart and of the stars, and combined them into amazing songs that spoke of human suffering and human life and human light. This was Leonard Cohen. I first heard Leonard Cohen when the scratchy record player turned on my sister's vinyl record player, and he sang with his gravelly voice, "Suzanne takes you down to a place by the river." Anybody know that song? Anyone ever heard it? Yeah, a few of you have. That's when I first heard it, but you know, as a kid, I didn't understand sages and musical poets, and it took many years before I appreciated Leonard Cohen. Leonard Cohen was born in Montreal. He was 9 years old when his father died, and it left a deep mark on him. He was 9 years old when that happened, and he was an unconventional kind of figure. He enjoyed poetry and graduated from McGill University with a degree in English, and in his pocket he had a Canadian grant to write poetry. He traveled off to London, England, landed there, and guess what the first thing was that he purchased? A typewriter and the most exquisite raincoat that he could find. He was a dapper fellow, as they used to say, and some called him a ladies' man. It wasn't long before he flew off to Greece, and there he met Marianne, who he later wrote a song about, a Norwegian girl. And they lived the life of drugs and poetry for a few years on an idyllic Greek island called Hydra. But he moved on to advance his career, and sang of his regrets of leaving Marianne behind later on. There were many women he loved, and many women loved him. But there were his two children by Suzanne Elrod, that he poured his love into without stop. And they became his friends and his co-workers. His son helped him on many projects. He was a deeply spiritual man, and his friends joked that there was never a religion that Leonard didn't like. At one time, he became a Buddhist monk. And he said that never conflicted with his Jewish upbringing in Montreal, because the Buddhists don't have a God, and his God was still the Judeo-Christian God. And by the way, Jesus is an amazing man that everyone ought to listen to, and you hear hints of that in his music. All of his spiritual imagery fills his music, and like the biblical psalmists, he wrote in parables and in dark sayings. There's an ancient saying that is the glory of God to hide a matter, and it's the glory of kings to draw it out. And guess what? He made us kings by making us draw out the beauty of his songs. In his famous song, Hallelujah, he writes, "Now I've heard there was a secret chord that David knew, and it pleased the Lord." But you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing Hallelujah. In the last 15 and 20 years, he won the most Juno and musical awards of his life. He was appreciated earlier, but he was extremely appreciated later. His songs confronted the reality of suffering, and he said there is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. He, like a dear friend, he poured whispers of his mistakes and his failings into our ears to encourage us to get through our mistakes and our failings. And with that, he enabled us to enjoy the magic of life, even with the brokenness that comes with it. He was suffering from cancer in his late years. He was 82 when he died, and he was 82 when he released his last album, You Want It Darker. And the lyrics to that lead song is, you want it darker, so we killed the flame. And he has an incredible tower of work. So he was suffering from cancer, and in this recent interview he said, I'm ready to die. No, let me correct that. I am ready to live eternally. In that song, You Want It Darker, he said, I'm ready, Lord. And he went back to the Jewish chanters and used amazing words like Hinein, which means, here I stand, God. And used that chorus in You Want It Darker. And he writes, magnified, sanctified, be thy holy name, vilified, crucified in the human frame. He understood things, deep, deep things. He was a legend. He will inspire the generations to come. He inspired us to live fully in being who we are. He inspired us to find beauty in ashes. He inspired us to live nobly, both in life, and he inspired us to live nobly in death. Thank you, Leonard Cohen, for making our darkness brighter.